Alright guys, coming up in today's video, we're talking about the exciting land transfer tax. Stay tuned because this is a closing cost that potentially could cost you tens of thousands of dollars. So you better know it. You could get some rebates. We'll talk about it. Coming up next, stay tuned. Bam! Alright guys, thanks for joining me. Michael Jacobzak here, and today we're talking about the exciting land transfer tax. So please do not fall asleep on me because we're going to be covering a lot of great information that potentially could be tens of thousands of dollars as an expense on closing. So if you're buying property, you could be subject to provincial, municipal taxes. If you're in the US, state and county transfer tax. You want to obviously keep this in mind when you're buying to budget accordingly. There could be, some exemptions with tax rebates for first-time home buyers, which we're going to go through that. And like I said, but basically what we're going to cover is an overview. We're going to cover who's eligible for rebate taxes. We're going to cover the documents needed to get those rebates. We're going to actually do a live, example of when you're calculating this, and just the tax rate you're paying when you're purchasing. So I want you to stay tuned. Don't fall asleep on me, because this stuff is not the easiest to talk about, but you need to know it. Right into it. When purchasing a home, you're going to be subject to a land transfer tax. Now, like I said, depending on where you're buying, for instance, if you're buying Ontario, you're going to be subject to provincial. But at the same time, if you're buying in Toronto, you're going to be subject to provincial and municipal. So you're going to have to pay Toronto as well. Now, like I said, on the US, it's going to be state and county taxes. So depending on where you're buying, you're going to want to look into this prior to buying to make sure what you're paying and how much you're going to be paying based on the land value that's being traded. Now, a big question is, when selling, do sellers pay this? And they do not. Buyers are only subject to this. It's a one-time fee. And like I said, depending on the value, fair market value that you're paying, because if you're getting inherited property, you're going to be subject to this still. So it goes on fair market value of what is being traded, and then based on fair market value, there's going to be a rate that you're going to have to pay. So it's something to keep in mind, because on closing, this cost, like I said, could range in Ontario from 0.5% to 2%. So if you're buying a $1 million property, it's a pretty big expense in the long run. Now, talking about the tax rates, depending on, it's a formula that you're going to use, and depending on the purchase price or the fair market value of what you're buying, it's going to get multiplied by the different brackets as you move along. So I'm going to explain the brackets first, and then we're going to do a real live example, and that's going to make it all come together a little more easy to follow. So the first bracket is anything under $55,000 is going to be taxed at 0.05%. Now, anything from $55,000 to $250,000 is going to be multiplied by, or essentially 1%. And then the remaining amount between $250,000 and $400,000 is going to be multiplied by 1.5%. And then anything over $400,000 is going to be multiplied by 2%. So as I said, we're going to do a real life example just to make it easier to understand. So in our real life example, we're going to be using $400,000. So the first $55,000, as we said, is going to be multiplied by 0.5%. So essentially you're going to do 55,000 times 0.005. which comes out to $275. So on the next bracket, you're going to multiply the existing money up into 250, which would be 190,000 times 0.01%, which equals 1950. And then the remaining amount left over, which is obviously capped out at 400,000, would be 150,000 times 0.015, which comes out to 2250. Add that together, our final tax would be $4,475. Now, if we were doing this is provincial. If we were buying in Toronto, we would essentially have an additional tax of this for the city. So as you can see, it can add up pretty fast, and understanding what you're paying going into it is going to obviously help you budget accordingly when you're buying a property. All right, guys, when you're calculating the land transfer tax, instead of doing that crazy formula that I showed you, obviously there's room for error if you're doing all the math yourself. There are calculators out there. Yes, there are calculators to make it easier. So if we jump into, and I'll put a link in the description below, but this is what you would be doing instead of doing the math. All is you jump into here, you put your purchase price, we'll say 400,000, and you put calculate, boom. So as you can see, the provincial land transfer tax is $4,475, and if you were buying in Toronto, you would have another amount, and the total would be, if you were buying in Toronto, would be $8,950. So as you can see, this is a lot easier than doing all the math manually. Okay, now talking about the rebate on the land transfer tax. If you're a first-time home buyer, you do qualify for partial or sometimes even full amount of the land transfer tax. Now, to qualify, you must be at least 18 years of age. You must have never owned a previous property. So that would mean if you have ever been gifted or inherited property, it would disqualify you from getting that rebate. So it's very important to understand, if you ever do receive property from, inheritance or anything like that, that you may not be getting in the future a rebate on your land transfer tax. Now, one thing to keep in mind also is the maximum amount of money on the rebate that you can get is $4,000. So anything over $368,000, you would only get max $4,000 below. So you'd be paying the tax on the additional amount. So keep that in mind. In terms of documents, when you're applying for your refund, typically you're going to work with your closing attorney with this, but just to give you an idea of what they're going to require, you're going to put together a cover letter, and it's obviously going to state type of the amount of refund you're going to should be expected, as well as your name or who the check's going to be made out to. You're going to have a summary of the docket, which shows the tax to be paid, a copy of your sales and purchase agreement, and any schedules that's going to be attached. You're going to want a copy of any adjustments, statements, stuff like that, copy of registered instrument. So this is all documents, and also consideration of an evidence showing the fair market value of the property. Now, like I said, a lot of these items, your closing attorney is you're going to be working alongside with them with these documents. But if you weren't, and if you close and you're getting exempt, you're going to apply after by yourself, you would be required all these items. So I'll leave a link in the description where you can get all these, but also the link to my article, which documents all this stuff as well. Okay, now the last thing I want to touch base on is land transfer tax and property taxes. So these are two different types of taxes, and you should not get them confused. As we've been saying, land transfer tax is a one-time tax when purchasing property, whereas property taxes is an annual tax that you're paying, obviously, to the city, and that goes towards your schools, your roads, and then the city maintaining the city as where the property resides. So these two taxes don't get confused, because property taxes, like I said, you're paying that every year, where land transfer tax, if you're not exempted, you're paying that one time. Guys, the next part is probably the most important and probably the only thing you need to take in out of this whole video. I know it's been long, you've probably been falling asleep, but what I cannot stress enough is and like I said, guys, that's without that information right there, it's very crucial with land transfer tax. So you definitely want to take notes that last 30 seconds or so, because very important stuff. And that concludes our land transfer tax video. Hope you got some knowledge out of this. If you did, hit that like button. Feel free to comment if you have any questions. Like I said, below I'll put a few links that are going to be helpful when you are obviously looking at your closing costs and your land transfer tax. Like I said, it's a big tax. If you don't budget for it, it could hurt you on closing. All right, guys, like, comment, share, and we'll catch you on the next one.